From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
It was sometime, I think around spring, was it, that we first came across it. A contact of ours had acquired the complete list of properties for both the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall.
The famous Sunday Times Insight team got their hands on quite the discovery.
So we have a contact, and he's taken great interest in the duchies in the past. And he decided to see if he could get out of the land registry the full list of all their properties. I don't think he had a huge kind of hope, but he thought it was worth a crack.
The duchies, being the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall, the former being the private property collection of the monarch, and the latter, the private collection of the monarch's male heir. And by private, we mean, well, really private. Until now.
When he initially made the request for the Duchy of Cornwall, he only got 9 properties back, which he knew to be a nonsense.
Yeah.
And he challenged them on it. And they then apologised and provided him with 1,800, the full list.
Something that they've never revealed in the past.
No.
Asks them, and they go, I'm so sorry. Yes, here you are. Here is the full list.
But bear in mind that when he got the list, it was just a row of numbers. But this was clearly a breakthrough. And he then thought, well, let's try for the Duchy of Lancaster as well, which he did, and then got more than 3,000 properties for them.
It slowly dawned on the Insight team what a treasure trove of information this was. They had succeeded where parliamentary committees had previously failed.
We realised we finally had the information that the members of Parliament had been trying to get hold of. It allowed us to bring some transparency to the duchy's holdings for the first time. It meant that we could plot every property owned by the King and the Prince of Wales. And we didn't really know at the time what would turn up, but we started delving into it, and that's taken several months.
Several months, because remember, the information they had was just reference numbers from the land registry.
And so what we had to do was match those numbers to addresses. And from there, we then had to go through each address individually and pull any leases and contracts that were connected to those land titles so that we could see what the business deals were that the duchy had struck to make money out of those particular properties. And obviously that took a long time. So once we'd done that then allowed us to have a much fuller picture of how they generate their income.
This is an unprecedented insight into the royal finances. A Duchy original, if you will. The story today. Inside the secret Duchy files. The Sunday Times Insight team.
Jonathan Calvert, and I'm the editor of the Sunday Times Insight team.
George Arbuthnott, and I'm the deputy editor of the Sunday Times Insight Investigations team.
Together they went through all what was revealed. The property King Charles and Prince William own as the Dukes of Lancaster and Cornwall, and how their portfolios operate.
About 20 years ago, Parliament did ask the Duchy of Cornwall to disclose a list of its properties, but the Duchy refused and said it was a private matter. And so this is the first time that anybody has been able to see the full list.
And Jonathan, explain for me what these duchies are, because this isn't the Crown estate, is it? These are separate private holdings? I mean, what's the dividing line?
They're kind of estates that go back to the 14th century. They were lands seized by the kind of ancient kings. They were made into particular kind of fiefdoms. The Duchy of Lancaster for the monarch and the Duchy of Cornwall for the Prince of Wales. And as time progressed through the centuries, there have been various attempts by Parliament to try and control them. the ancient monarchs used to have the crown estate as well. So they would own vast tracts of the seabed, the riverbeds, the beaches, the lands, all of those things. And at the time that Parliament took control of the crown estate from the monarchs, they did leave the two estates, which are Lancaster and Cornwall, as they were. The intention is that they provide a private income for the monarch and his heir.
So the crown estate is now owned by the government.
Yeah.
And the monarch gets a share of that, sort of given back the profits, don't they, to help run their official duties.
That's right.
The money from the Duchy of Lancaster, which the monarch runs, and the Duchy of Cornwall, which the Prince of Wales runs, that money goes, well, I mean, what's that money for?
That goes to pay for their lifestyles, really.
Yes, okay. And they're quite big, aren't they? I mean, people who might want to brush up on their Shakespeare remember that arguably Henry Bolingbroke murdered Richard II so he could get his hands on the Duchy of Lancaster. It's quite a pile of cash that the owner of it can get.
Yeah, well, the Duchy of Lancaster last year generated £27 million in profit, which all goes to the king, and the Duchy of Cornwall generated £23 million in profit, which all goes to the Prince of Wales.
And George, these aren't just in Lancaster and Cornwall, I assume?
No, they actually cover vast swathes of England and Wales. Duchy of Cornwall spreads across 20 different counties. So Cornwall, the Scilly Isles, much of Devon, Somerset, Bath, Faversham and Kent, but also buildings in London as well. The Duchy of Lancaster covers a lot of the north, so Lancashire, Yorkshire, Crewe, also in Wales and Bridgend, where they own quite a lot of mining rights, and same in Derbyshire, but also big landholdings in London too. They both consist of farmland, national parks, shoreline, rivers, residential and commercial properties, public buildings, and also vast swathes of subterranean mineral rights and mines, which is beneath the country's surface.
Okay, and so if in the past we haven't really been able to see the full scale of these enormous private estates that the king and his male heir have to help fund their lifestyles, once you got all of these land registry codes and could see what this was and the full extent of it, what stuck out for you? I mean, what did you uncover that really got you excited?
Well, I guess the main story was that they reveal that the prince and the monarch are charging the general public, charities, government departments, councils and businesses via, in effect, kind of feudal levies on land that was seized in the 14th century. So it's almost as if they have a finger in every pie. They're making money from everything from big commercial property in London, but they even, charge for a scout hut and a public loo in the Isles of Scilly.
They're charging people for the right to cross rivers or dump waste into them, offload cargo onto the shore, run cables under beaches, operate schools and charities, save lives in ambulances or lifeboats, and even to dig graves.
Isn't there a charge on pints somewhere as well?
That's right, yeah. They take a cut of revenue from the pubs on their land, the bridge tolls, the ferries, sewage pipes, distilleries, oil and gas pipelines, boat moorings, underground mines, car parks and wind turbines. So it's really a very thorough revenue-generating approach.
And give me an example then of a bit of land that one of these duchies owns and then a public service wants to do something on it and is finding themselves having to pay some kind of charge back to the duchy.
Well, for example, you could take Dartmoor Prison, which is a prison that was actually built by the Admiralty, so it wasn't built with royal money. It is on land owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. And so they recently struck a lease with the Ministry of Justice in which the Ministry of Justice has to pay something like £37 million over the entire term of the lease just to use the prison, which is actually a building that the taxpayers built anyway. And in addition to that, there's a clause in the lease which says that the ministry has to pay a further £68 million to renovate the building. So that is more than £100 million on the public purse.
Yeah. And as you say, it spans so many different public services. I mean, George, even sort of hospital care as well in some instances.
Last year, Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust in London was seeking to tackle ambulance waiting times in London by buying a new fleet of electric vehicles. And it needed some garage space. And the Duchy of Lancaster said that it had been happy to help and put out a press release saying it had granted a red brick 1980s warehouse that it owns close to Tower Bridge for the purpose. But what we were able to discover through the Duchy files is that the King is actually charging the NHS a total of at least £11 million in rent payments over the next 15 years for its use. So far from kind of granting the NHS, this kind of almost a suggestion of some kind of charity.
Mm.
And what we also discovered was actually the rent has actually been ramped up for the NHS compared to the previous tenant of the warehouse, which was the Metropolitan Police.
And it's not just, I guess, hospital care that comes into this, but also, Jonathan, defence of the realm as well.
Yeah, the Duchy of Cornwall owns stretches of the seashore and rivers, including the bed of the Dart estuary, which runs alongside the Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. And the Duchy charges the college to moor their boats, in effect charging the Navy to access their own boats.
They are charging £900,000 from the Ministry of Defence over the 20-year term of the lease, which is basically for the right for the Academy to moor and use the boats. The Academy has to do that because otherwise you can't train naval officers without the access to the water.
And the irony is that Prince William himself was a cadet there, as was his father, as was his grandfather and his great-grandfather as well.
And some might say, so what? They're private landowners. These are private estates. They own this land. Someone wants to use them, okay, albeit for maybe parking ambulances or access for naval cadets and their boats. But they are using this land. They own it. Why can't they charge rent on it?
The King is the head of the armed forces. William is head of the submarine service. The Prince of Wales has actually attended the passing out parade at the Naval Academy in December. And they're hugely kind of thankful to the armed forces in public.
And is this treated like any other kind of earning, Jonathan? I mean, is this sort of taxed and declared in a sort of normal way?
The thing that marks them out is they're not a normal commercial landlord. They don't pay any capital gains tax. They don't pay any inheritance tax. They don't pay any corporation tax. They don't pay any tax, basically.
But how does that work? I don't understand. As in, is that just something because that was the case 600 years ago, so it's just remained?
Yeah, it's because they're regarded as the kind of the royal fiefdoms, and therefore they don't pay any tax. And they're exempt from all sorts of laws. Say, for example, if they have property that, say, a council might want to compulsorily purchase to build a road or something like that, they could just say to them, well, you have no power to do that, which means, of course, they can charge whatever they like for them. So they're not competing on equal terms with other landlords. They've got great advantages over them.
And the King and Prince are not compelled to pay any income tax either. But the King has voluntarily been paying income tax on around half the duchy income. However, Prince William has recently refused to reveal his tax payments.
Yeah, we can see from the duchy files the full extent to which both duchies are run as modern-day corporate commercial landlords, generating millions in income for the monarch and his heir without paying corporation tax. And that gives them quite a big advantage over their competitors.
And George, you've been speaking to some accountants who I guess have explained all of that for you. To what extent this does give them a commercial advantage?
That's right, yeah. So we spoke to a number of accountants and they said it was a big advantage over their commercial rivals not to be paying corporation tax because it meant that they could keep more of the money that they make than their competitors. And that allows them to undercut their rivals in commercial negotiations. And they said that this was particularly pronounced since corporation tax had risen in recent years from 19% to 25%.
So the point is, if you're able to keep 25% or even in previous years 19% of what you've been earning, that allows you to undercut your rivals. And have we got any sense actually how much they are running this as a properly commercial operation?
Yeah, well, what we can see is that they've been doing massive property deals involving the buying and selling of land over relatively short periods and making an absolute killing out of it, selling a property for almost twice as much as they bought it for only a few years before. They're also doing an increasing number of mining contracts with companies seeking to drill and dig into areas of outstanding natural beauty in the UK, which is obviously also a kind of very commercial thing to be doing.
Many people, Jonathan, will think that these holdings are largely just sort of castles and farmland and the rest, but actually it's big business, it's big money we're talking about.
Yeah, their rental agreements kind of stretch across a whole number of different sectors. I mean, for instance, you can see that they earn £60 million over 21 years from a barrister's chambers in London. They earn £4.6 million from a newspaper distribution warehouse in Hemel Hempstead. They get something like £5.5 million from a hair and beauty products company for the use of an industrial estate in Blackburn over the years. And these are all for over the term of their lease. I mean, some leases are longer than others, but it all amounts up to quite a substantial income over the course of each year.
Interested to see as well that part of the Duchy of Lancaster's holding includes a service station which has a KFC and a Shell garage, which isn't exactly the most royal thing you'd expect. And what do they say about this corporation tax point?
So they deny that it distorts the market and effectively gives them a commercial advantage. And they also publicly claim that they don't rely on any taxpayers' money. But what the Duchy files have revealed is that they're actually receiving millions of pounds every year from taxpayer-funded bodies like the Army, the NHS and state schools. Another thing we found in the Duchy files is that the Prince of Wales owns a building called Camilla House, which is a functional 1960s office block next to the MI6 building in London overlooking the Thames. And it's actually become known by letting agents as Charity Towers because so many charitable organisations have rented offices there. They include Macmillan Cancer Support, the hospice charity Marie Curie, and also even Comic Relief. And the King is the patron of Macmillan and Marie Curie. And what the leases show is that the Duchy owns the freehold to Camelford House and lets the building to a head tenant called Thames Water, which then sublets the offices to the charities. And on the charities' leases, the Duchy of Cornwall is described as their superior landlord. Now, the rents are set at a commercial rate. So under the contract, the Duchy has received a third of all the rent collected from the building, which amounts to at least £22 million over the past 19 years. And over that period, the charities' rent payments for their offices in the building have amounted to £16 million from Macmillan, £10 million from Comic Relief, and £9 million from Marie Curie. And there have been big rent increases. Macmillan, for example, for the offices they've leased from 2005 to this year, were ramped up by close to 90%. And the charity actually left the building this summer so it could downsize and cut costs. And Marie Curie also moved out, complaining of an onerous lease. When we asked the charities about it, they believed that they had paid the market rate, and so they'd always dealt with the head tenant, Thames Water. We spoke to Baroness Margaret Hodge, who's the former chair of the Public Accounts Committee in the House of Commons. She believed it was inappropriate for Charles and William to be making money out of charities that they had been encouraging the public to donate to. She said that if a charity has a royal patronage and therefore gains extra income as a result, it's not right that they continue this relationship when the patron themselves is receiving the money back. And she said that the charity shouldn't have those kind of relationships.
If you're enjoying this episode of The Story, you can listen to more by subscribing to the podcast. It's completely free, and we'll put a link below in the description box for different ways you can follow us.
Jonathan, George, you have this enormous list then of all the properties that the Duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall own, some of the rents that people are having to pay on them, some interesting quirks of the leases that are in place and many of the conditions attached to them. And as landowners, as we've discussed, the King and the Prince of Wales are in quite a unique situation. Tell us about what's happening in Tamar Valley. This is something that the Duchy of Cornwall owns. Is that right, Jonathan?
Tamar Valley is an area of outstanding natural beauty, and in the centre of it is a big quarry where, in order to mine the stone, they let off explosions once a month. This has been going on since at least 2004, but what the local residents didn't know was that, in fact, actually the land is owned by the Duchy of Cornwall. So it used to be the King, and it's now the Prince of Wales that owns it. And they have an agreement with the company that is mining the quarry called Heidelberg Materials, and they are making money out of mining.
What have some of the residents been saying about the impact on them about this?
So we spoke to Vanessa Peel, who lives very, very close to the mine, and she describes how the crashing explosions from the mine rattle her windows. And it's been compared to the aftershock of an earthquake in terms of the violence of it. She said that cracks have appeared on her walls, the granite hearth needed replacing. Other residents have said that it's actually damaged their health and given them spinal problems. And Janice Sperring, who also lives very close, said, I sometimes think the Duchy have got no idea about local communities. I'd like to put this quarry next to Buckingham Palace for a few months so they can see all the dust and the fumes. So they're seriously unhappy about it.
And how much is the Duchy actually making from the mining?
What we can see is that the Duchy of Cornwall receives a fixed rent, which from 2004 to 2014 was £25,000 a year, plus a cut of the stone that's exploded out of the mine. So the more the company digs out, the more money the Prince of Wales gets. And so it's very much a kind of very commercial arrangement.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier on that it's taken quite a long time to get this information out there in full. Explain some of the attempts in the past that there have been, Jonathan, to try and shake this information out of the monarch and their heir.
Back in 2005, there was a Public Accounts Committee hearing on the two duchies. The MPs were actually quite interested in the environmental record of the Duchy of Cornwall. And one of the things that Ian Davidson MP, a Labour MP, were being keen to find out was what properties they owned.
Given that the Prince has expressed very strong views on this, I do find it surprising that you cannot give us an assurance that the property owned by the Duchy, all the property owned by the Duchy, none of it could be described as unethical or unsustainable in environmental terms.
Partly actually because he wanted to find out whether what they said about their environmental credentials were correct, and that they were treating all the properties in a kind of way that was kind to the environment. And so he asked directly the representative for the Duchy of Cornwall, who was a man called Bertie Ross, who has the title of Keeper of the Records, whether they could have a full list of the properties that Duchy of Cornwall owns.
Can you give us a list of the properties in which you have investments in order that we can make judgments as to whether or not they are ethical and sustainable?
We have something over 3,000 different agreements with people.
And is that a yes then?
That's the guess.
Or is that a no?
We have 3,000.
No, I'm asking whether or not you can give us a list.
And the Duchy's representative absolutely refused.
I don't think this is an issue that is
Is that a no then? Is
relevant to this committee?
He just would not give it to them.
Can we have a report on the list of properties?
I don't see why.
I know you don't see it, but I'm asking you, can we have it?
I don't think it would serve any better purpose.
No, you don't know that you don't think that, but I do, and I'm asking you a yes or no. Will you make available a list of the properties? I mean, are you refusing to do so?
I'm not saying no, but I still need to be persuaded there's a good reason.
If you're not saying no.
So that was 2005. The Public Accounts Committee also looked at this issue again in a subsequent hearing.
Yes, in 2013, the same committee, which was now chaired by Margaret Hodge, the Labour MP, called for a full Treasury investigation into the Duchy's business deals to see whether their special tax status gave them a competitive advantage over other companies. But the Treasury, as a result, asked the Duchy of Cornwall itself to look into or review whether they were distorting the market, and the Duchy of Cornwall did an assessment and concluded that they were not distorting the market.
So Parliament wanted this looking into. They asked the Treasury for a full review. The Treasury said, Duchy of Cornwall, can you please look at this yourself? They look at it and they say it's fine.
That's right.
And how much of all of this and the management and the decisions, how much of that can you actually put at the feet of the now King or Prince William, the Prince of Wales? Because I'm sure they have teams and teams of people actually running these things. I mean, would they honestly know about any of this stuff?
So both the King and the Prince of Wales claim to be extremely hands-on with the duchies. It's been described that Prince William has been WhatsApping his duchy team 7 days a week, kind of issuing orders. He chairs something called the Duchy Council, which effectively runs the estate. And he actually also appoints all the members of the council. And so certainly it does seem that they have very close involvement. And with Charles, when he was in charge of the Duchy of Cornwall, the staff called him the boss as a nickname. He also appoints the members of the council. So they seem to be absolutely intrinsic to the running of both.
What do you think both will come out of all of this now there's a bit more light shone on it? I mean, many people won't have heard of the Duchy of Lancaster. Many people won't have heard of the Duchy of Cornwall beyond pricey biscuits in Waitrose and elsewhere. What do you think the questions are that will persist in people's minds?
One of the people we talked to in the course of this investigation was the Mayor of Liverpool, Steve Rotherham, because it happens that the Duchy of Lancaster owns huge amounts of the riverside all the way along the north end of the Mersey and then all up the coast to Barrow and Furness. But in Liverpool, this means that they can charge for every container that goes onto the Liverpool 2 dock. They can charge for the Mersey Gateway Bridge, which is a new bridge, a toll bridge. They charge for a series of wind turbines on the side, and Steve Rotherham is quite exercised about this. And what he told us was that really he hopes that this story will create a wider debate about whether kings in the 21st century should be getting money from land that was taken from people in feudal times, and whether, in fact, it was time actually to put the 2 duchies back into the government's control, just as they do with the Crown Estate. They could pay them a percentage of it.
I mean, is that a likely outcome from any of this, George, do you think?
Margaret Hodge said that there should now be an investigation by the government into the duchy's operations. I mean, in the past, the Public Accounts Committee recommended that the Prince of Wales should not be allowed to have any management involvement in the Duchy of Cornwall, but that was ignored. So Baroness Hodge says that the duchy files make clear that there needs to be a full investigation into the duchies, and particularly looking at whether these estates need now to be modernised and whether they can now benefit the taxpayer and the public much more fully, rather than supporting and providing personal income to the King and the Prince of Wales.
You've both, of course, taken all of this to each of the duchies to hear what they make of all of this. What have they said in response?
The Duchy of Lancaster said that it operates as a commercial company managing a broad range of land and property assets across England and Wales. It complies with all the relevant UK legislation and regulatory standards applicable to its range of business activities. It
adds, while His Majesty the King takes a close interest in the work of the Duchy, the day-to-day management of the portfolio is the responsibility of the Council and Executive team, and the financial and environmental performance of the Duchy is disclosed each year in its published report and accounts, which are independently audited and freely available on the Duchy of Lancaster website.
And what about the Duchy of Cornwall?
Well, the Duchy of Cornwall spokesperson said, the Duchy of Cornwall is a private estate with a commercial imperative. which we achieve alongside our commitment to restoring the natural environment and generating positive social impact for our communities.
It adds that Prince William became Duke of Cornwall in September 2022 and since then has committed to an expansive transformation of the duchy, which includes a significant investment to make the estate net zero by the end of 2032, as well as establishing targeted mental health support for its tenants and working with local partners to help tackle homelessness in Cornwall.
George Arbuthnott, Insight Deputy Editor, alongside Jonathan Calvert, the Insight Editor. The full investigation with plenty more detail is at thetimes.com and on Channel 4 On Demand for the accompanying Dispatches documentary. That's it from us. The producer today was Edward Drummond, the executive producer was Kate Ford, and sound design and theme composition was by Mal Assetto. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to hear from previous Insight investigation podcasts, we've put a link in the episode's show notes. I'm Luke Jones. See you tomorrow.